Okay, well, as you know by now, I should think, in this series of Sangha nights, we've been looking at mindfulness, a Buddhist invention, now sort of borrowed by the secular world, but a Buddhist invention. But so far in this series, we've been looking at what we might call inner mindfulness. Mindfulness directed inwards at ourselves. This would be a very strange noise on this. Can I put it a bit further down?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it catches my lisp. Can you hear me now? No.
Yes, you can. Just turn it.
Can you hear me now? Hey! Okay. Yeah, we've been looking at inner mindfulness, mindfulness directed, as it were, towards ourselves. So in his discourses on mindfulness, the historical Buddha talked about mindfulness starting with the body, and particularly the breath, and the mindfulness of breathing and the body, and then moving on to mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of thought, and culminating in mindfulness of reality. Ooh, we'll come to that a bit later. So, yeah, we're not going to get far on the Buddhist path without mindfulness of what's going on in our mind and our heart, mindfulness of feelings and thoughts, because that's what lets us make decisions. It lets us make decisions about what to put our energies behind, what thoughts, what emotions to put our energies behind, and what to let just sort of fade a bit. Skillful, yes. Unskillful. So it allows us to be in the famous gap that we all heard about. And if we're not there, if we're not aware of what's going on in our heart and mind, it rules us from the shadows. We just respond to it without even knowing it's there. We act automatically. We're at the mercy of our mental weather, blown this way and that by our reactions. We're not in charge of our lives. So those are the areas the Buddha focused on. But Sangha, the founder of Triratna, added 2 extra dimensions of mindfulness to the Buddha's list. So he talked about mindfulness of the world around us and mindfulness of other people. And that's what I'm going to focus on tonight. So for some reason, the Buddha didn't seem to talk so much about those, about mindfulness of the world around us, the environment, or mindfulness of other people. Maybe because they were taken for granted in the world he lived in. People lived close to the natural world, really integrated into the natural world. And their occupations required them to pay attention to the material world rather than to ideas or images or words on a computer screen. And they also lived in close-knit communities where awareness of others probably came completely naturally. I used to work for an NGO that worked in India, and I remember in Africa, West Africa. And I remember something about being there that I realized that people knew what was going on in me much more than people did in the UK, because they really looked at me, and I felt a bit naked, actually. I felt, I can't hide how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking in the way that I perhaps would be able to in a British context, because these people are just much more aware of me, living in a quite different world. So I think the people in the Buddha's world would have been very aware of other people living in those close-knit communities, and they would have been aware of the physical world around them because they had to deal with it. That's what they were dealing with every day. But we live in a very, very different world. And if we want to get far on the spiritual path, then as well as developing awareness of what's going on in our minds and in our hearts, we need to pay attention to those outer dimensions of mindfulness, of awareness. Because the circumstances of modern life mean that all too often we live in a sort of grey, diagrammatic world of human-made, human-manufactured ideas, a world of mental chatter and media chatter. So we walk down, going to work, we walk down a tree-lined road on a sunny morning with the birds singing, and we're looking at our phone or having a conversation on our phone, or listening to our earphones, or worrying about the day ahead. And then we spend our work day looking at a screen maybe, or in a state of hurry and distracted busyness. And then we get home with a buzzing mind that can't settle. So we look for more and more distraction to get us away from the discomfort of that. And living in this unreal world of ideas and mental chatter makes us prone to a host of negative mental states. We could single out anxiety as one of the main ones that's an absolute epidemic affecting people in our world. The world of mental chatter is, what we call prapancha. You've probably come across the term prapancha, meaning mental proliferation, unreal castles of ideas in the air, ideas built on ideas. And this world of mental chatter is an unreal place. It's a place built out of shadows and diagrams, and it's not a happy place. It's not a happy place. And because we are not in a happy place, so often we look for more and more mental stimulation, more and more entertainment, more and more input, which hides our lack of contentment for a while. But at the same time, it keeps us firmly in that unreal shadow world and not in contact with the real world. If we're not careful, we can live our lives hardly aware of the real world around us or of other people as well. But if we can learn to get our attention out there, onto the world, to pay attention to the real world around us in all its beauty and all its variety, and to pay attention to other people in all their fascinating variety, then we give ourselves the keys that allow us to escape from that grey world into a much more enjoyable world that's full of colour and full of full colour experience. It's vivid and full of full colour experience. And of course, beauty. So the beauty that we can see in the natural world in particular, but also in art and so on, but in the natural world in particular, it's telling us something. It's telling us something about the nature of reality, if we can learn to listen. So there was a Japanese teacher called Kukai, who, to quote him, he said, "Painted by the brushes of mountains, by the ink of oceans, heaven and earth are the bindings of a sutra revealing the truth." So if we pay attention to it, we can learn to read the sutra, which points us towards the truth. But sort of stepping back a bit from that, the title of this talk tonight, I believe, is An Aware Mind is a Happy Mind. Yeah, oh good, I remember. And I can safely say that the times in my life when my experience has been most enjoyable have been times when I have been most aware of the outer world and had the fewest mental distractions. For example, I lived for nearly a year up a Spanish mountain, doing plenty of meditation, surrounded by the elements, surrounded by natural beauty, with none of the distractions or comforts that we just take for granted as part of a happy life, really. And I often describe it as the happiest year of my life. Even though there was hard work and at times it was quite uncomfortable. From where I was living, you could see down to the Spanish Costa, the bright lights of the Spanish Costa. But when I traveled down there, which I sometimes had to do, I would just feel a bit sorry for the holidaymakers trying to have a good time down on the Costa. They had far more of the things that are supposed to make us happy than I did, but they actually often looked rather sad or rather grumpy. I remember another occasion when I was on a meditation and mindfulness retreat in Wales, mainly in silence. Okay, it took me a while to go cold turkey, on mental stimulation and settle down, to let my mind settle down into contentment. But towards the end of the retreat, I remember going for a walk with another retreatant. And although we were often in conversation, which usually sort of brings us back into the world of prapancha, mental proliferation, although we were often in conversation, I was in a state of delight, just looking at the world around me, a state of joy, delighting in the world around me, delighting in this other being I was with. Really a state of, what surprised me, it was so stable, such a stable state of joy, really. And this state even lasted for a while after I got back into what we laughably call the real world. It was even there, of all places, on the platform at Crewe Station. So I remember just walking up and down the platform, waiting for a connection that was well late. And I was in a state of delight, still in that state of enjoyment and appreciation, even in a place that was not at all beautiful in the conventional sense, and where I could have just been frustrated and annoyed about the lack of my connection, basically. So I know from these and other experiences that if we can learn to pay the right sort of attention to the world around us and to the other people we live among, then we can make our experience vivid and alive and experience a form of happiness that I don't think most people even know is possible. But it's not easy. It's not easy. Firstly, we need to learn to pay attention. And crucially, we need to develop the habit of paying attention to the world around us. If we don't make it a regular habit, well, every now and then we may decide to pay attention to the real world, and we might do that for a while, but then there'll be long periods when we just forget. We just forget and we just go back into the world of mental proliferation. I remember once on an order convention, someone giving a talk about mindfulness. And I just remember one thing that she said. She said, it's easy to be mindful, but it's difficult to remember to be mindful. And that is so true. It's so true. So we need to develop the habit of being mindful, because otherwise we won't remember to be mindful, or not very often. And as with any habit, we develop the habit of mindfulness by doing it over and over and over again, until it becomes second nature. Daily meditation, of course, that's a big help. Daily meditation is a big help, especially if we take our meditation off the cushion with us when we start our day, take our mindfulness with us as we start the day. We practice mindfulness every morning, maybe every other morning, hopefully. And it starts to be a habit. It starts to become a habit that we can get into easily. A few other suggestions. We could try putting some time aside, maybe an afternoon every week, when we give up our usual distractions, put them over there, and try and just look and listen and feel. That isn't always easy either, because our minds get addicted to stimulation. So maybe sometimes we need a halfway house or a few halfway houses, rather than going cold turkey on input straight away. So perhaps we could set aside that afternoon, maybe start by some reading, read some Dharma, read some poetry, listen to some music, really listen to some music. Or do some mindful physical activity to get our mind into a more fit state, then maybe meditate, and only then just practice the difficult art of paying attention to what is. Perhaps going for a walk and just looking, listening, just feeling the elements. And one thing I think is probably essential to getting into the habit of mindfulness is going on retreat every now and then. Going on retreat is something Buddhists do. I encourage you. We give ourselves periods away from our usual distractions. Very annoyingly for some people, if you go to most Buddhist retreat centers, the first thing they do is take away a mobile phone and lock it up in a cupboard. So we take ourselves away from our usual distractions, and I suspect some people hide them. But anyway, take away our usual distractions, take ourselves away from our usual distractions, and do more meditation than usual in a very conducive environment. And I think we need to do that because it takes, as I said, can take our minds a few days to settle down, stop looking for input, so that we get quite content just to enjoy our awareness rather than looking for distraction. So I think going on retreat and having a few days, little while when we do that is really, really essential. And finally, on another suggestion about developing the habit of bringing mindfulness more into our lives, on what we call our urban retreats, invented in Sheffield, we suggest that people use reminders. Reminders could take all sorts of forms. Post-its we stick up on the mirror, screensavers on the computer, all sorts of things. Anything to just keep that in mind during our day so that we're reminded, we remember to be mindful. You can use all the creativity you can muster about that. People do some really weird things to do it. Like, I don't know. I won't go into painting their nails. Anyway, even when they're not the sort of person that you'd expect to paint their nails. Anyway, so that's the first reason it's not so easy to spend much time in this so enjoyable state of mindfulness. That's the first reason we have to develop it as a habit, because it's easy to be mindful, but it's hard to remember to be mindful. It needs to be a habit. It's hard to remember to be mindful. It's dead easy to get distracted. But the second reason it's difficult to spend a lot of time in that mindful state runs a bit deeper. To be genuinely mindful or genuinely aware, our mind needs to be in what I'm going to call a fit state. So you ought to remember Maitreya Bandhu. I don't think it was in his book. He wrote a book called Life in Full Attention. I know he said this, but I don't think it was in that book. He said, well, he just talked about how it's really important to develop a fit mind, he calls it, a fit mind. We could even say a healthy mind. So without a fit mind, in this sense, we can't really be mindful. We can't really be aware in any sort of very strong sense. A fit mind can focus. It's sort of unified. It can bring itself together and focus. It isn't scattered and diffuse, just thinking about this, that, and the other. A fit mind has a sense of purpose, a purpose that's a bit higher than just our own wants and needs. So it's not plagued by all the indecision and anxiety that comes with not knowing what on earth my life is about. A fit mind can enjoy pleasure, yeah, but it doesn't have to grasp after it addictively. And crucially, a fit mind is a mind that's imbued with metta, with warmth, with positive emotion, appreciation, fellow feeling. It's looking at the world with fondness. An unfit mind, by contrast, is scattered, unable to bring itself together, so that attention is superficial and dim. It's probably plagued by anxiety and other negative mental states. Will tend to crave sensory pleasure, tend to crave pleasure to get out of And where have I got to? And well, crucially, an unfit mind will often tend to be experiencing aversion rather than metta. So looking at the world with irritation or anger, looking for faults, looking for blame, or looking at the world with fear, looking for occasions for anxiety. So with an unfit mind, we could be in, I don't know, the Taj Mahal. We could be in the Taj Mahal, but we'd probably focus on the spider webs in the corner rather than the majesty of the building. And even if we could sort of pay some sort of attention to the building, our appreciation would be weak and dim, even if it was there, because our attention would be weak and scattered and all over the place, rather than focused. And most of us, there are two extremes. Most of us probably have a mind that's a bit between the two. And we go a bit more one way and a bit more the other way, according to circumstances, etc. And it's at the times when our mind is most fit that we're going to experience the most real awareness, the most mindfulness. And we're going to get most enjoyment out of the world and other people. People often notice this on retreat. So the world starts to look more beautiful. People often comment on this. More vivid, simple things become more enjoyable because conditions help our mind to become a more fit mind. I remember once being on helping out with a retreat in an orange grove, which helped, in Spain, which helped. And it was very simple. I mean, we started, we did the mindfulness of breathing, taught the mindfulness of breathing, complete beginners, did some mindfulness of breathing, and then asked people to just go and walk around the orange grove. And people went out and they looked around the orange grove in the sunshine. And I remember one guy came back and he said, "It's amazing. I haven't seen the world like that since I was a small child." Out of all those mental ideas that we pick up as we get older and actually in the reality, and the reality is so beautiful, so enchanting. So yeah, retreats, second mention, they're really good. Anyway, so our whole Buddhist practice, in a way, points us towards a mind that is more fit. That's what a lot of it is about. Meditation, ethics, the lot point us towards a mind that is more fit, and therefore point us towards greater awareness and greater enjoyment of the world. Looking at it, the same material in a slightly different way, we could say that awareness, mindfulness, comes in different strengths and it comes in different flavors. So in terms of different strengths, the more our mind is unified and focused, the stronger our awareness will be, the more it will really see what it's focused on, so that our experience will be more vivid, more in full color. The more our mind is scattered, the more our awareness will be weak and shallow, and our experience will be sort of dim and not particularly vivid at all. So there's that strength, which varies from time to time, circumstances to circumstance. Our awareness can have different strengths, and our awareness can also have different, I'll call them flavors, different flavors, depending on our emotional state. If we're all in our head and completely out of touch with our emotions, our awareness can be cold and alienated. And it's totally uncommon for people to get into that sort of state, thinking they're being mindful. I am now picking up the cup. I am now. It's sort of unspontaneous, stiff, unnatural, almost robotic. That's not real mindfulness. If our mind is full of ill will, our awareness will be irritable and angry, seeing the faults and the reasons for blame everywhere. I remember going for a walk, beautiful day, lovely environment. We were walking actually past on that track that goes past a place that we sometimes do retreats, another mensch, Lockerbrook. It was going past Lockerbrook, high up above the Derwent reservoirs. And the person I was with, they saw the cement factory that you can see down in, I think it's in Hope, belching out smoke. It's a beautiful day. There was so much to appreciate. All she could talk about, all she could think about was the cement factory and how it shouldn't be there. You know, so that's a certain sort of awareness, a certain sort of mind. She was very aware of the cement factory. She wasn't aware of the beauty that was all around us. Taj Mahal again, you know, cobwebs in corner. So a cold mind, or a mind of ill will, irritability, aversion, can give rise to a flavor of awareness that doesn't taste great. But if our mind is imbued with metta, and if we're in touch with our emotions, our awareness will be warm and appreciative, involving our whole being, both our head and our heart. And only that last flavor of awareness, imbued with metta, whole, only that is really mindfulness, according to Sangha. In fact, only this flavor of mindfulness is really awareness at all, actually. I'll come on to that in the fullest sense. So Sangha has defined mindfulness as appreciative attention. Appreciative attention. He says that mindfulness is an awareness that is looking at the world and other people with appreciation, even with fondness, even with love. So a crucial part of developing mindfulness is getting in touch with our emotions and cultivating metta. Practicing the metta bhavana is just as much part of developing our mindfulness as practicing the mindfulness of breathing. The mindfulness of breathing helps our mind to be more unified, less scattered, so it increases the strength of our awareness, its vividness of our experience. But the metta bhavana gives our awareness that flavor of appreciation, of fondness. The two come together. The more we do them, both those practices, the more they come together. And the two come together to bring about real mindfulness and true awareness, certainly as defined by Sangha. So perhaps we could say that true awareness is what allows us to really know, to truly know another person, or to truly know a tree, or to really know a piece of music. It takes more than just allowing our senses to experience the visual impression or the sounds, or to acquire knowledge about it, to really know. You don't know a great piece of music by studying the score and seeing where the key changes happen, or by just hearing the sounds in a cold, unemotional way. You know that piece of music by allowing it to affect you. By, in a sense, merging with it. You become it for the time that you're listening to it. And the same goes for a person or a sunset. To truly know a person or a sunset, we need to reach out, as it were. Reach out and sort of touch them with a fond, appreciative awareness. Almost, we could say, we merge with them the way we would merge with a piece of music. So there's a passage in a book called The Essential Sangha where he tells a story of an apprentice painter in China who wanted to learn how to paint bamboos. And his teacher, his master, didn't tell him anything about the brush strokes to use or the pigments or anything else. He said, if you want to paint bamboos, first you must learn to really see bamboos. You must learn to really be aware of bamboos. So he sent him out to look at bamboos and become aware of them. He looked at the stems, how they leaned and how they formed patterns together. He looked at the leaves, how they hung, the angles they hung, and how they moved in the breeze. He looked at bamboos in the mist and how they sparkled with little tiny droplets of water. He looked at bamboos in the rain, in the sun, and in the moonlight. He spent years looking at bamboos. And in this way, Sangha says, he became genuinely aware of bamboos. And being aware of them, he became one with them. Not the way we become one with a piece of music. That's what Sangha says. He says he passed into them and they passed into him. And then he could really paint them. And Sangha goes on to say that that should be our attitude to all material things, to the whole world around us. He says this should be our attitude towards the sun, the moon, the stars, and the earth, toward trees, flowers, and human beings. We should learn to be aware, and in this way, he says, we should learn to become one with all things. Or at least, he says, to fuse with all things, with a realization of affinity and deep unity. And that would be true awareness in the fullest sense. We would really know the world we're living in. And to me, that sounds a lot like enlightenment. Enlightenment is said to be the ultimate happiness. And Buddhism is very clear that the way to enlightenment is via increased awareness. So, real awareness of the sort I've been talking about. So I think we can really say that an aware mind is a happy mind. And long before we get to enlightenment, the more appreciative awareness we experience, the happier we will be. And in the West, people often talk about enlightenment as doing away with our sense of self, sometimes even doing away with the self. But Sangha advises us that we shouldn't think so much about doing away with our sense of self, which could be negative and dangerous. We should think more about expanding our sense of self to include more and more of the world and more other beings. As he says when he's talking about bamboos, we should develop that sense of unity and affinity with all things and all beings, where we identify much more widely, concerned much more widely than just about this little bit of the universe. So here's a quote from a 17th century English mystical writer called Thomas Traherne, who talks in much the same vein. In his Centuries of Meditation, that's the work, he says, "You never enjoy the world aright until the sea itself flows in your veins, till you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars, and perceive yourself to be the heir of the whole world, and more so because men are in it who are everyone heirs as well as you, till your spirit fills the whole world and the stars are your jewels, till you love men so as to desire their happiness with a thirst equal to your zeal for your own, you never enjoy the world aright." Again, that sounds to me like enlightenment, but it may also sound an awfully long way away from where we are at the moment. But we can move towards it. We can move towards it, and we can increase our enjoyment of the world and of life along the way. By spending some free time away from our usual distractions and taking the time to look, hear, and feel the real world. by gradually developing the habit of doing that, by regularly doing the mindfulness of breathing to focus and strengthen our awareness, and by regularly doing the metta bhavana to give it that flavor of appreciation and fondness, by taking our opportunities to go on retreat so that we get periods when we can experience as fit a mind as we can have, and putting all that together by learning to look at the world and other people with appreciative awareness, so that gradually we expand our self-identification to include more and more of the world and more other people. And that would be very nice.